Hello everyone, wherever you are watching me from. This is the best English tutor. Today we are going to look at a specific structure in English language. Today we are going to look at relative clauses. So I'm sure to some of you that have written grade 12 before, and those that are planning to sitting for GCE this year 2026, you might find this information to be very vital as you are preparing yourself for English language paper 2. For my friends that are in grade 12 or grade 11 as well as grade 10, you might learn or you might have learned this topic before. So today we are going to revise on the same. So what are relative clauses? Now with me on the screen there, I've picked transformation questions based on what we are looking at today. Now as you can see, I've picked there 10 questions there, but before we start to answer these questions, we might need to remind ourselves some of the key components that will help us answer these transformations. Now, the starting point here will be what relative clauses are. Now, to make you understand what we are basically talking about, we are going to define what a relative clause is. Now, a relative clause provides useful information about someone or something just mentioned in the sentence. Okay, now when we are talking about someone or something, okay, since we are being told that relative clauses, they provide useful information about someone or something. Now someone or something in a sentence basically is a subject. Okay, so a subject of a sentence is what is mentioned. So in most cases, a subject is usually a pronoun or a noun. Okay, so a noun in simpler terms is a naming word. Okay, is a naming word. So now when they say relative clauses, they provide useful information about someone or something mentioned in the sentence. Okay, now that on its own is not complete. So relative clauses, they also, okay, or they are usually introduced by relative pronouns. Okay, now what are these pronouns? Okay, what are these relative pronouns? Now these relative pronouns are connectors. Okay, they connect these clauses to the main clause. Okay, now such pronouns are that, who, or which. Okay, for example, I can give an example to say the girl who lives next door has traveled to Lusaka. Okay, I will repeat that. The girl who lives next door has traveled to Lusaka. Okay, so the girl, we are going to underline the girl there. Why? Because it is what is being mentioned in the sentence. So it is the subject of the sentence. So the girl there is a subject. Okay, now the relative clause there, it is who lives next door. Okay, now who lives next door gives us information about the girl. Okay, so we are not just talking about any other girl, but we are talking about the girl who lives next door. Okay, so what has she done? Has traveled to Lusaka. So the relative clause there is who lives next door is what is modifying the subject there. I can give you the second example. We can say these shoes which my aunt gave me do not wear out easily. These shoes which my aunt gave me do not wear out easily. Okay, same applies. same explanation. These shoes is a subject. Okay, now if you look at the difference between the first example and this example, is that the girl could be any other girl, but these shoes are specific. We are not talking about any other shoes, we are talking about these shoes. And which shoes are these? Which were given to me by my aunt. Okay, so do not wear out easily. So we can pick out certain components from the second example here. So the first one is the subject is specific. Now if the subject is specific, okay, it means it is a proper noun. Okay, so if it is a proper noun, okay, this simply entails us that the relative clause, okay, that will precede this subject will just give us an added information, okay, about the subject being talked about. Okay, now this will bring us to the second thing that we need to talk about, that relative clauses are in two types. We should never forget this. Relative clauses are in two types. The first type of a relative clause is a defining relative clause. Now, a defining relative clause, this is what gives the subject, okay, more or detailed information about it. Without it, the subject may not be identified, okay, or cannot be identified. Without it, the sentence remains hanging. For example, we take the first example, the girl who lives next door has traveled to Lusaka. Now, let us omit the relative clause there, which is who lives next door, and simply say the girl has traveled to Lusaka. Yes, it sounds correct, but it will leave us to ask certain questions such as, which girl has traveled to Lusaka? Once there is a follow-up question, it means there is something wrong with the sentence. So to make this sentence complete, we need to add a relative clause there that will give us more information that should identify the subject, which is the girl. So who lives next door is the relative clause. So, and this is not just any other relative clause, but it is called the defining relative clause. Without it, the subject cannot be identified. So it gives us full and detailed information about the subject being talked about. Whereas the second type of a relative clause is a non-defining relative clause. Now, a non-defining relative clause basically gives us additional information. Now, get this clearly. For defining relative clause, we say they give us detailed, specific information. Now, for non-defining, they give us additional. There's a difference there. Additional, okay? Which means you have something already. You are just adding, okay, some spices to what you already have, okay? So, in simpler terms, we are saying non-defining relative clauses, they are just spices that spice up the subject. Now, without these non-defining relative clause, the sentence still remains grammatical correct without raising any sort of questions. We get the second example. These shoes which my aunt gave me do not wear out easily. Now, let us omit the relative clause there, okay, which my aunt gave me, and it is going to read as, these shoes do not wear out easily. Which question can you ask there? As I'm talking, it means I'm showing you those shoes, okay? So I'm simply telling you to say, these shoes, they do not wear out easily. So the relative clause there is just adding more information to the shoes which I'm showing you, that these are not just any other shoes, but these were given to me by my aunt. Okay? Now, when we are using the non-defining relative clause, remember the two clauses needs to be separated by the use of a comma. Okay? these shoes, comma, then you mention the relative clause. After the relative clause, comma, then you say, okay, what you want to say about the subject. Okay, the other thing that will help you to identify or to differentiate the two is that, as I've already spoken of the first one, which is the other one is you cannot omit it, okay, from the sentence, whereas the other one you can omit it. The other way of identifying the difference is that the defining relative clause, the subject is usually not specific, it is a general subject, okay, such as the tree, the car, okay, the man, okay, the girl. So those are general subjects. But when we're talking about specific subjects, okay, such as these shoes, okay, Mr. Michael, okay, Mr. Matinanga, so those are specific subjects, okay. Those are specific subjects. Once there is a specific subject, it means it is going to be followed by a non-defining relative clause. Not only is it going to be followed by non-defining relative clause, it is also going to be accompanied by the use of two commas. I hope I've made myself clear. Now let's get back to our transformation questions now that we've got the basic knowledge of what we are going to talk about. Now, the instruction there says, join the following pairs of sentences by using relative clauses. 1a, the men have been arrested. They tried to break into the shop. Now, how do we join this particular sentence here? The men have been arrested. They tried to break into the shop. Okay, so join this sentence using the relative clause. Now, when joining these, it means, remember from our definition, it means we need to use relative pronouns here. Okay, relative pronouns. Now, we are going to talk about relative pronouns in details, maybe in the next lesson, so that we fully understand their usage and when to use them. Okay, so this is going to read as, if we were to join it, so it will be, the men who tried to break into the shop have been arrested. The men who tried to break into the shop have been arrested. So let me try to write it there. We can simply write the men who, let me use a different ink, the men who tried to break into the shop have been arrested. Okay, so this is going to be like that. It is going to be like that. It is going to be like that, like that, like that. Have been arrested. Okay. Okay, I hope that is clear. So the men who tried to break into the shop have been arrested. Okay, so that is it. That is how we join the first one. Okay, so as you can see, the men is the subject. So once the subject is mentioned, what should precede it is a relative clause. that is giving us more information about it. So it is the man who tried to break into the shop is the relative clause there, have been arrested. Now, let's check out the second question. The man is friend of ours. He owns that garage. Okay. So we'll do the same there. So this one will be joined like this. The man who owns that garage is a friend of ours. Full stop. Okay. Okay. The man who owns that garage is a friend of ours. Full stop. So that is how it will read, or that is how we join it. The man, okay, the man, that is the subject, and it is a general subject. Remember what I said? So which means this is a defining relative clause. Okay, the man, then it should be followed by a relative clause. Okay, who owns that garage is a friend of ours. Okay, now all these, most of these are defining a relative clause. Now let me identify one non-defining relative clause. You see how we join it, you see the difference. Let's look at question 7. Question 7. Question 7. Question 7 says Mr. Zulu has finally completed his grade 12 despite being over 30 years. Some people used to laugh at him. Why have I chosen this? Because I've seen Mr. Zulu there, which is a specific subject, which means this is a proper noun, and this is going to give us a non-defining relative clause, and this will be joined as follows. Mr. Zulu has finally completed his grade 12 despite being over 30 years. Full stop. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be, let me bring it down here, okay, so that we see clearly what we are talking about, and I explain one or two things there. Okay, so Mr. Zulu, comma, why are we putting a comma? Because Mr. Zulu is a specific subject. Okay, at whom some people used to laugh has finally completed his grade 12 despite being this is supposed to be over. Okay, it's supposed to be over despite being over 30. Okay, despite being over 30. Now, maybe some of you might wonder, why has the preposition been put before the relative pronoun whom? Now, in formal writing, okay, whom is used for the person being laughed at in this sentence. Then commas are used because Mr. Zulu is a proper noun, okay, making this a non-defining relative clause. I've already explained that. Now, you don't say Mr. Zulu, comma, whom some people used to laugh at. Okay? No. In formal writing, when you are using home, because home is used to refer, okay, to an object. Remember, Mr. Zulu there might be looking like a subject. In the actual sense, it is an object. Why? Because Mr. Zulu is the one that is receiving, okay, receiving the action, okay, because a subject is what does the action, then the object is what receives the action being done by the subject. Now in this case, okay, in this case, Mr. Zulu is the one that suffers the action of being laughed at. So no wonder we did not use the preposition, I mean the pronoun who, okay, instead we've used home, because home is used when we are referring to an object. Okay, now at is usually written before, okay, the relative pronoun in formal writing. But when you're saying, it's also okay to say Mr. Zulu, whom some people used to laugh at, has finally completed grade 12 despite being over 30 years. It's still okay, but in formal writing, okay? This is why I'm here to help you thrive. This is why I'm called the BET, Best English Tutor. Okay, so at should be used just before the relative pronoun, especially if you are using home to refer to an object. Okay, so try to do these other questions which I've not tackled, then give me the answers in the comment sections. I'll be able to read them until we meet again in the next lesson. For some of you that would want one-on-one tutoring, or that would want to join my online learning platforms such as on WhatsApp, you are free to text me on my WhatsApp number that I'm going to put on the screen. Okay, let me put it there. So my number is +26 0974 039406. Okay, so that is my number. Okay, that is my number there. Okay, if you want to get in touch, you can simply call me on the number on the screen, that is +26 0974 039406. It's a goodbye for now until we meet in the next lesson. Goodbye.